Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
It all started one rainy day. A wagon pulled up to the estate. A woman who was dressed all in black came out of there. She turned to Claudia, who had come out to meet her. She said that she sympathized very much with her loss, for she had lost a dear person. But it was bound to happen sooner or later. A girl named Claudia thanked her for coming and also told her that her support was very important to her. In fact, Claudia was the daughter of a middle-status nobleman of the Laruth kingdom, Count Korat. She, with her head down, told the girl who had arrived that her father would be very proud. In fact, her father's funeral had just recently ended at that moment. Soon, when all the guests had gone home, the girl fell to the ground and could not understand why her father had left her alone. The girl cried, for she missed him very much and did not know how she would live alone now. Claudia was approached by a woman in the back. Her name was Ira, and she said that she could cry all she wanted because she had the right to show her feelings. In fact, this girl was Claudia's older half-sister, and with a smile, she said that they were family after all, so she shouldn't be shy about her feelings. Then she looked at Ira with tearful eyes, but she didn't answer anything, but only thought of different things. The girl came up to Claudia and, hugging her, told her that they should continue to live, supporting each other in everything, because no matter how it was, they were one family. They returned to the manor shortly afterward, and the next morning, as the sun shone into Claudia's room, she finally woke up, but she didn't even get out of bed because of the grief she had felt the whole time. Suddenly, however, someone knocked on her door. She was a little surprised at this early visit, but said that whoever knocked could come in. After that, the door opened, and Ira appeared on the doorstep. When she saw her sister, she said she was glad she was awake. She also told Claudia that she had baked her favorite scones, and asked if she would like to keep her company at breakfast, if only for a little while. The girl still felt just disgusted, but still agreed to her sister's proposal. In fact, just because her father was gone, she couldn't cry and lie in bed forever. After all, she still had Ira and her mother-in-law. So after thanking her for the invitation, she said that she would come down very soon. Claudia's mother died when she was very young, and her father tried to shower her with love from all sides. But she never stopped feeling lonely, even when they were around. Her father eventually remarried 6 years ago, and Ira became her half-older sister. And soon afterward, Claudia came downstairs just as her stepmother, Sally de Cora, and her sister were already seated at a small table. The girl bowed and apologized for the wait. She called the woman her mother and said hello to her sister. Sally turned to Claudia with a smile, wondering how she was feeling in general after all that had happened. The girl lowered her head again and said she was fine. But of course that was a lie, for she was sad. However, the stepmother paid no attention to all this and, smiling, said that it pleased her very much. There was an awkward silence in the room for a while, after which Claudia said that she was sorry for making them worry. However, now the three of them would be protecting the Korat family, so she didn't think there would be any problems. Then she walked over and sat down at a small table. When she saw that there were desserts and tea, she suddenly noticed that another cup was missing. So Claudia turned to a maid named Beth, who was standing nearby, and asked if she could fetch it by any chance. However, the maid just stood still and did nothing. She was actually very anxious, causing her body to shake. When Claudia noticed this, she became very wary and turned to her, asking what had happened. At this point, Sally laughed and said that now that he was gone, there would only be 2 in the Korat family, and they could be served by servants. Claudia, upon hearing this, was madly surprised and looked in her stepmother's direction, not knowing what she was even talking about. However, at that very time, Ira got up from her seat. She came closer to the girl and poured hot tea over her head. The girl was incredibly surprised and didn't understand what had even happened. She looked at her half-sister with a surprised look and asked what she was doing. However, Ira turned to her and said that she had thought for a long time whether the social society needed to look forward to the debut of the Count's 2 beautiful daughters. Therefore, she came to the decision that one would probably be enough for the society. Claudia was all wet. But on hearing this news, she even forgot that the tea was hot and looked at her sister and asked what she was even talking about. Ira, still smiling, said that simple truths took a long time to reach her. When she came closer to her, she said that from this day on, she was the only daughter of the Count, and everything that had belonged to Claudia before now belonged to her half-sister. Ira then folded her arms and called the servants to remove the trash from this room. Of course, all the servants of the house were very unpleasant to do all this because they valued the Count and his own daughter very much. However, they had to obey this order, so they grabbed Claudia by the hands and began to lead her out of the room. The girl immediately started lashing out and asked what they were even doing. Beth, who continued to hold her by the shoulders, apologized and said she was insanely sorry, but she had to do it. Her sister, in turn, smiling smugly, said that everyone had taken her side, and when her father had passed away as planned, her side would not even be taken by a single person from the servants now. When Claudia heard this, she couldn't believe her ears. She didn't understand why it was expected of them, since her father's doctor was her stepmother's confidant, and she couldn't believe that they could really do such a thing. But the girls had said then that she didn't need to know the whole truth. It didn't matter at all right now anyway, so it would only be superfluous information. Afterward, Ira said goodbye to her sweet little sister and said that she had been quite fun to be with. Claudia couldn't believe what she was hearing and kept screaming that it was all a lie. She really hoped it was a lie, because they had even picked out a dress for her debut in society together, and she couldn't believe that her sister had really done that to her. They had made the truest promises to each other, yet now Ira had just taken her and betrayed her. Eventually, the servants of the house led her to a very dark and forgotten place. It was in the basement of the manor house. The girl was dressed in a horrible garment, and sitting behind bars, she screamed and begged to be brought home. She said that it was all a mistake and that it was wrong. Soon some man who was watching the prisoners came up to her and told her just not to say such nonsense in front of the guests. He also said that if she was taken for crazy, he would get less profit from her sale. So it was best for him to keep her quiet. When Claudia heard this, she started yelling even louder, saying that it was all completely wrong between Ira and the others. They just had some kind of understanding and that was it. But the man, smiling happily, said that she was very deeply mistaken, for she had just been sold to him and was now in a cheap brothel. The girl, upon hearing this, was very surprised and could not believe that she was really in a brothel. The man, still smiling, said that she seemed like a pretty smart girl, so he would say that this place was a living hell for the likes of her. He also said that in this place she would become a veritable slave to the worst perverts. Claudia was horrified to hear this, and the man kept talking and said that despite all this, her silver hair was really beautiful. This sort of thing is rarely seen among slave girls. Then he laughed and said that he could already imagine how much money he could make, and added that he would introduce her to his high-ranking client. Claudia immediately burst into tears. She realized that it was just a nightmare, but she knew that it was probably real, and she would not be able to wake up from it. Shortly thereafter, she and some other girls were taken upstairs to an establishment where a number of men were seated drinking and dining. They stood in the middle of the hall in handcuffs and collars looking upset. Especially the little girl who was on the verge of hysterics was there. In fact, the smell of cheap alcohol, cigarettes, and men's perfume made Claudia want to cover her nose so she wouldn't smell those disgusting odors again. At that moment, right in front of them, some bald man pushed one of the girls, who was also dressed in horribly tattered clothes. She cried out at once. Then he said, smiling happily, that there were no suitable girls at all in this place to satisfy him. When Claudia saw him, she was very frightened. She tried to hold her expression, but it was not so easy, for this was really a terrible man. At that moment, a girl with brown hair who was standing nearby turned to her and told her to be careful with him, because this idiot takes mental pleasure in hurting defenseless girls. She also said that she had seen him kill many innocent souls with his own hands and only took pleasure in such actions. Claudia, hearing about him killing innocent girls, was very surprised. She didn't understand what kind of place she was in or why these people were doing such things. At this point, the man just about approached her and, running his grubby fingers over her face, said that she was an incredible beauty, and smiling, added that he wondered if she was the right girl. Claudia was incredibly frightened. She tried to pull her face away from his horrible hands, but he only smiled and said that sapphire eyes and silver hair were rare in normal society. In fact, the girl wanted desperately to get away from this place, and he began to lick himself disgustedly and said he had already decided who he was going to spend the evening with. After that, he threw some coins on the counter and said that it would be his advance payment for this girl. When the guy who was just about to collect all these girls to sell later saw the money, he immediately took it and, smiling, thanked him for the purchase. He also added that you can do absolutely anything you want with this girl because he paid a rather generous fee. Claudia felt just awful when she saw everything that was happening. She immediately turned around and tried to run away to avoid this terrible fate. However, the man immediately grabbed her chains when he saw this, and her throat was crushed, and he happily began to smile. Claudia could not believe that she was actually shackled around her neck, and he swung at her and told her not to dare resist him, and also called her an inferior girl. She immediately closed her eyes in anticipation of the blow and realized that this was going to end incredibly badly. However, when nothing happened after a while and she heard some strange sounds, she decided to open her eyes and check what was wrong. And as soon as Claudia did that, she saw some man in a cloak in front of her who stopped the guy's punch. She looked at her savior in surprise and couldn't believe that he had actually decided to stand up for her. This stranger immediately turned to the man and inquired if he really dared to raise his hand against the unfortunate girl, and also called him a most genuine madman. But the man couldn't stand it. He shoved his hand away and asked who he was and how dare he tell him anything. He also added that he paid a lot of money for this girl so he can do whatever he wants with her. The stranger continued to speak with a nonchalant expression on his face and added that his behavior was really just disgusting, and for no money, he had no right to treat the girl like that. The man got even more angry, and a vein started to protrude on his head. Then he started to attack the guy and told him to shut up, because he dared not tell him anything. Claudia immediately started screaming and asked that the man beware, for he just kept standing there watching a huge drunken man being carried at him. But soon, when the big man's hands were very close to him, the stranger managed to dodge and delivered the first blow to his stomach. The one was immediately confused and didn't understand how this had even happened, so the stranger managed to quickly run him off the other side and put him on the ground with one blow, telling him that he was the one who should shut up. All the people who had crowded around were incredibly surprised at what had happened. They didn't even say a single word. At that moment, the hood came off the guy's head, and the girl could see his beautiful red hair as well as his eyes, in which scarlet blood seemed to flow. A tremendous willpower was visible in them. They even made Claudia's breath catch, and she couldn't take her eyes off this man. They were cold yet hot colors in his appearance, and when the man turned his gaze on her, she was immediately startled. All because he grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled her as close to him as he could, and afterward, turning to the crowd, inquired as to who was the master. Then the thin man raised his hand up and said in a trembling voice that he was the owner of these girls. The stranger immediately dropped the bag of money and asked if it would be enough to ransom her. The salesman was so surprised that he couldn't even say a single word, but only waved his head in agreement. Then the man, looking him straight in the eye, said he would warn him once and for the last time. He must give no information to the man who had sold her house, and if he refused and did the deed, he would hardly want to know the consequences that would await him. The salesman even fell to his knees in surprise and couldn't say anything. He was so frightened because of this stranger. At this moment, this very man took Claudia in his arms, and the girl was surprised. She had no way of knowing who this man was or why he was doing such a thing. The man looked her straight in the eye and, smiling, told her she could rest easy. He would not hurt her. But of course she could trust no one else, so she asked in a trembling voice what he was going to do with her. He took her outside and put her in his wagon, saying it was up to her. In fact, the nightmare that was about to become a reality vanished thanks to the sensation of the carriage shaking. She felt safe, if only briefly. However, even with all this, it still bothered her that she didn't know what would happen to her next. And even so, her story continues, moving right into the future. She really hoped that future would be a good one. Soon Claudia, because she was very tired after what had happened, fell asleep quite quickly. When she opened her eyes, she looked out the window and saw that it was morning. They were driving past green trees, and the girl realized that she had fallen asleep. She couldn't believe she'd fallen asleep in the wagon, and afterward, she wondered where they were going. But the man answered her nothing. When she looked out the window on the other side, she saw Stefano's house, and when she recognized it, the look on her face spoke for itself. The man, seeing this, immediately inquired if she already knew what kind of place they were going to. Claudia replied that of course she knew that, for in the whole kingdom it was the only building with a black roof, and it was the home of the Stefano family. She then shifted her gaze to the man and wondered if he was really who she thought he was. The stranger interrupted her and looked her straight in the eye and said that he had apparently forgotten to introduce himself, and added that he was Marquis Aiden Stefan and also the head of this family. Claudia, hearing this, couldn't hold back her surprise and even opened her mouth in surprise. She couldn't believe that the one in front of her was really the same Aiden Stefano, for he was the most pure-blooded demon. In fact, the commander of the Larud Kingdom's knights was quite famous throughout the empire. There were rumors about him that his hair and eyes were dyed red due to the amount of blood he had spilled. And also he always has the cold and sharp gaze of the most real madman, so people are even afraid to look into his eyes. Soon afterward, they finally approached the manor, and Claudia, plucking up her courage, wondered why a pure-blood demon would suddenly want her. The girl wondered what his true purpose was and why he had brought her with him to his mansion. The man, smiling, looked at her and asked if she really wanted to know what purpose he had brought her for. Then he moved closer to her and, running his hand over her face, told her that she should wash herself first because she smelled pretty bad. At this moment, the door to their carriage opened, and as they came out, the butler bowed and said hello to Mr. Aiden and told him that he was very glad to have him back. Claudia was a little surprised at such a remark, but she herself realized that she smelled bad. So when they entered the manor, she went straight to the bathroom. The girl lay back and really enjoyed the hot water that was spreading all over her body and couldn't understand why he was being so good to her. Not to say they're just taking care of a purchased slave. He wants to clean her up, probably in order to resell her to someone. Suddenly a maid knocked on her door and told her that the food was ready. Claudia immediately got up from the bathroom and said she would be right there. In fact, the girl no longer wants to be treated like some unnecessary thing, which, if you get tired of it, you can just give it away and also benefit yourself. Soon she changed her clothes and went downstairs. The maid was waiting for her and told her that her main course was beef fillet with vegetables. She also said that the master told her to go straight to her room after she had eaten. Claudia sat down at the table. Then the maid, taking her cart, began to leave. But the girl asked to stay a little longer and wondered why she had been brought to this place in the first place. The maid, smiling gently, replied that she herself did not know. Her task was only to convey the master's orders. When the girl heard this, she sighed heavily and said that everything was clear to her, but she herself could not guess what this man was planning. When evening came, she went outside and realized that she needed to escape as soon as possible so she wouldn't become another toy for someone else. Even though she had been bought out, she still wasn't going to be in this place doing only what she was told to do. But then suddenly Claudia thought about the fact that Ira and her stepmother had clearly messed something up, and it all led to some not-so-good actions. The girl was going to return to the Carrot family home and find out the truth. At that very moment, Aiden, who was standing in his room, looked out the window and saw the girl running straight to the gate. Soon afterward, she was able to get through the fence and thought that if she went through the woods, she would come out to the main road and could ask some passing carriage for a lift. If she introduced herself as Claudia, the second daughter of Count Carrot, someone would be sure to help her. So the thought immediately pleased the girl. As she walked farther and farther, she suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her address her. Claudia was alert. When she turned around, she saw Aiden standing in front of her, leaning against a tree, wondering where she was going at such a late hour. Did she really not like the room that much? She was silent for a while and afterward, in a trembling voice, inquired why he was in the woods. Aiden ignored her question and asked, "Is she really trying to get home?" and also gave her full name, even though she hadn't introduced herself before. When she heard that, she couldn't even contain the surprise on her face, and now it was clear to her that he knew who she was. Having gathered courage, she asked him to help her get home, for she really wanted to. But the man, interrupting her, replied that it was pointless to do all that. Aiden also said that absolutely the whole kingdom knows that Claudia Decorat died of an illness. When she heard that, she asked what he meant, since she was alive and well, standing right in front of him. The man looked away from her and said that it was all true. Even the funeral had already been held, and the title of heiress had passed to her half-sister Ira. He also said that apparently it's finally getting to her, namely that her so-called family just took her and got rid of her. The girl could not even stand on her feet from this information. She fell to the ground and said that none of this was true. Her sister and stepmother could not have betrayed her like that. Claudia cried and screamed loudly, for all the time she had believed her half-sister and really thought they had a very good and friendly relationship. But at that moment, Aiden took her by the shoulders and looked up and told her to live her new life as his wife, and then she would be fine. She was even more angry when she heard this and asked him what he was talking about. Had he gone completely insane? The man ignored her remark again and said in a calm voice that she would eventually become the wife of a marquis, and that was a rather honorable status in society. Then he wondered if she might, of course, want to live on the street, deprived of her name, home, and status. Then, of course, he would not insist if such a life suited her. But seeing the chagrin on her face, he said he knew she wanted to get back at them. Now Claudia herself was wondering if she wanted revenge, because she still wanted to trust her family, even if Ira and the others had betrayed her. Then suddenly she remembered her sister's words before she left and realized that her only family in that cabin was her father. And these so-called relatives just took it from her, so she wasn't going to forgive them under any circumstances. So Claudia, plucking up her courage, turned to the man and inquired if he could really help her get revenge. Aiden rejoiced at this determination of the girl and said that of course he would help. They were silent for a while, and then she took his hand and wondered what good it would do him to help her. The man then explained that there was a slight suspicion that Prince Michael was involved among those who had framed her. And the Carrot family is quite a prestigious family in society, trusted even by the king himself. And as commander of the royal guard, he wants to expose the conspiracies going on in the royal court. Claudia, hearing all these arguments, realized that apparently her sister had thus set her sights even on the palace itself. When she heard all this information, she said thoughtfully that now she understood why he was so eager to help her. He agreed and said that they had to save the royal palace from a plot that was being prepared, and when she became his wife, she must give up her whole name, her lineage. So he asked if she was willing to take such a big step. Claudia realized that if she didn't get rid of it all now, she would never be able to get it back again. She was silent for a while, and then asked Aiden if she could borrow his dagger for a while. When the man heard this, he was very surprised and asked why she needed him in the first place. The girl explained that she was not going to point it at him at all. She just wanted to show her determination. At this point, he handed her the dagger in her hands. Then she started to take it out of its sheath and said she needed to say goodbye to Claudia for a while. And at the same moment, she reached for her hair with the dagger, saying she was willing to risk everything, even her own life. She then quickly cut her hair and said that in order to get back what was stolen from her, she had to go to such lengths. When Aiden saw her in her new form, he was surprised. He called her name to say something, but she quickly interrupted him. The girl, smiling, said that from now on she would be called her friend Lucy, the light of hope. In fact, the kingdom of Laruth is located on the western part of the continent. A large country with a long history, developing due to the fertile land. The whole political system was based on a king. The Knights of Laruth Kingdom are considered an unrivaled force in the entire continent, so people love and honor them greatly. Of course, all power is not only concentrated in the hands of men. Women also have a place in the social world. They are those who have beauty, good education, and connections, and they can definitely become important persons. They could also become concubines of the king or of the prince himself. The position of concubines is not the most stable, but there have been examples of concubines with power so great that it overshadowed their official spouses. The same thing happens in this day. One concubine has pushed aside the physically weaker queen and reigned at the top of the social world. In doing so, she eventually gave birth to Crown Prince Michael, and this concubine was a girl named Sophie. The next morning, Lucy and her new husband-to-be gathered in the dining room to eat breakfast. They sat at opposite ends of the table, and the girl watched for a while as he calmly ate the same food she did. And she was a little surprised by this, for she had heard rumors that he liked to eat the severed heads of his enemies. But of course, she was very glad that it turned out to be just a rumor, because that was definitely not a picture she would have wanted to see right in front of her. She continued eating her breakfast as she suddenly heard a cough from Aiden. She looked at him and asked what had happened. He looked at her and asked, "Is it really all that strange? A pure-blood demon eating normal food?" Lucy became very uncomfortable about this, but she replied, stammering, that it wasn't true at all, and she didn't think so at all. But Aiden ignored her words and said that actually wartime was very different from peacetime. The girl immediately realized that he was probably implying that if he did eat the heads of enemies, it was only in wartime. They continued eating their breakfast, and Lucy noticed that he had many scars. She wondered what kind of life this man had led. Aiden was the truest pure-blood demon and also the bastard son of the king. He controlled the royal guard thereby. In their country, even illegitimate children are given prince and princess status, but they made an exception for him, all because his birth mother was too low status. The whole kingdom was told the story that he was adopted by Stefano's family. She had also heard that he was a ruthless killer and killed his enemies nonchalantly, sometimes even taking pleasure in it. But at that moment she remembered what had happened last night and realized that still his hands had rescued her from the depths of despair and had been quite warm. So Lucy became incredibly curious to find out who he really was and not who he wanted to be on sight. She would really like to know what kind of man he was, and shortly after breakfast, the girl and Aiden went to the study together. He placed some textbooks on her desk, and the girl, seeing them, wondered in surprise what these were even. Aiden replied that she needed to read it and memorize it. Then Lucy wondered why she needed to do that, because she really didn't understand. But the man, seating himself on her table, replied that it was a legend, the story of Lucy's life. The girl immediately took one of the papers and began to read. It was written that this so-called Lucy was born in the far country of Nazuka and was a distant relative of Stefano's family. Lucy noticed that although it was a story, they were existing girls. However, it was worked out to the smallest detail. Aiden, noticing that she had begun to read, said that she was the daughter of a distant relative who had been entrusted with the house. They had lived together for a long time and had eventually hit it off in many ways and married. When the girl heard this, she thought 100 times that surely she must marry him, and the thought frightened her a little. The man, however, said they would have to wait a while before he announced their engagement. Lucy didn't object. She moved on to other papers. Aiden then said that in their country, it was tradition for aristocrats to not show their faces in public until the debut was officially announced. When she heard this, she immediately smiled and said that this was probably the reason why everyone, not knowing Claudia's face, believed her death so easily. He replied that that was absolutely true, but that was good for them. There was still the risk that Ira and someone else seeing her face would confirm her real identity. He also said he believes her revenge and his goals overlap in many ways, so they need marriage to accomplish that. In fact, Lucy had guessed it herself, but even after they were married, she wouldn't know anything about this Aiden thing. Before the man left, the girl rose from her seat and wondered if he held a grudge against his father, that is, the king. She knew the answer perfectly well herself, so she continued, asking why he was trying to uncover the plot against the palace. At that moment, Aiden was incredibly angry. He walked over to the girl, pushed her off the chair, and pushed her against the wall. He was incredibly close to Lucy, and enunciating each word slowly and loudly, he said it was absolutely none of her business. She certainly did not expect to hear such a thing, but said that she understood, and also added that he was a little afraid to join forces with her. She explained her behavior by saying that it just seemed to her that he knew her well, but she didn't, so she wanted to understand him better. But Aiden told her to rid herself of unnecessary thoughts and focus only on her goal, for she would use him for her revenge, and he would use her accordingly as well. Lucy looked at him in surprise, expecting him to say something else. The man turned and started to walk away, and before he walked out the door, he said he wouldn't be home for a while, so she'd better get Lucy's whole life story in her head before he came back. Immediately afterward, he changed into his military uniform and set off on his horse with his assistant to go somewhere on business. Lucy continued to stand in the study and, going to the window, saw their horses moving away from the estate. She thought of Aiden and didn't understand why, the moment she'd brought up his father, his eyes had suddenly gotten so sad, and suggested also that surely he must be hiding something, namely his true appearance, which might even be vulnerable. A full 2 weeks had passed since the man had left, and Aiden still hadn't returned to the mansion. One day, the girl, strolling through the garden with her maid, wondered where Aiden was and also what he might be doing. The maid turned to her and said that she had been ordered not to say anything, so she could not disobey the order. She turned and walked on, and Lucy said she understood. In fact, she was a little upset because she wanted to know where he was. Soon, as she began to approach the manor, she noticed that it had begun to rain quite heavily, and she herself did not know whether she should really wait for her future fiancé so desperately. Lucy knew that Ira had betrayed her. She felt like Aiden was going to do it too, and she didn't want to feel the pain that she had anymore. The girl realized that even though it was not accurate information, however, she still could not fully trust him. But at that moment, she had nowhere else to go. She was like a caged butterfly again, unable to escape to the surface because it was too dangerous. Soon, when the rain was over, the girl went to the veranda and began to study the papers again, for she must know them well. Lucy had read that her new identity was born in the distant land of Nazuka, and she wondered if she should even learn their accent to be completely convincing. After a little reading, the girl put the papers aside and, sighing heavily, realized that it was unclear for what reason, but inside the mansion, things were only getting worse. That was why she went outside. However, even in the garden, she was still insanely uncomfortable. At that moment, she suddenly heard someone's shouts nearby. It was the servants running past and talking about being faster. Lucy immediately looked over there, wondering if something had happened in the mansion. As soon as the servants returned to the mansion, they saw Mr. Aiden in front of them and said that they needed to take care of him immediately. The man who was covered in blood said there was nothing wrong with it, and he was really fine, so they might as well not worry so much and take it easy. Following them ran into the room, and Lucy, when she saw Aiden, she was immediately excited and started to run closer to him. But when she saw the blood on his armor, she was very surprised and said that he was wounded. She immediately asked what had happened, but Aiden, who had turned to face her, immediately turned away from her and told her to calm down. But the girl was all flustered and couldn't calm down so quickly. He then, while correcting his badge, said that it was blood that was on it that did not belong to him and inquired whether she was frightened because of it. When Lucy saw that his arms were up to his elbows in the blood of his enemies, and there was so much of it that it even stained his hair, she was surprised. After being quiet for a while, she raised her voice and said they didn't have time to argue. They needed to examine it right now. But at that moment, the man felt very weak and suddenly lost consciousness, falling right into the girl's arms. She was very frightened, but with the help of the servants, they still brought him to his bedroom and dressed all the wounds that were on his body. Lucy stayed close to his bed and periodically changed the cloth that lay on his forehead in order that his fever might subside a little. She actually wondered where he had gone for so long, and she realized it was a special assignment, for otherwise he wouldn't have come back so injured. However, she also didn't understand what was stopping him from telling her about this assignment in the first place. It wasn't long before Aiden finally did start to come to his senses. He quickly sat up on the bed and began to look around in a small panic. Lucy took notice at once and asked that he be without sudden movements, for his wounds had not yet healed. The man immediately began to examine his bandaged wounds, and afterward, when he heard someone's voice, he asked, "Is it really her?" The girl looked at him and said that she still couldn't trust him completely, but she couldn't leave such a wounded man alone. Aiden didn't even look her in the eye and wondered in surprise, "Is she really not afraid of him?" She took his hand and said she would be lying if she said she wasn't afraid, but she had her reasons. Lucy explained that even if he is a pure-blooded demon, he is still her husband. The man, hearing this, was very surprised. He was silent for a while, then said that his wounds were caused by his recklessness during the mission. In fact, while he was on a mission, warriors who had already fallen to great injury approached him. One of them told the commander that the Sharika Kingdom's army was twice the size described in the report from the palace, and there was no way they could handle them. Aiden was sitting up at this point, dressing his wounds. Afterward, he told him to calm down because they just needed to kill them all. He said that they should be heading out already instead of sitting around chilling, but his partner said that if he went out into the battlefield with those wounds, he would definitely die. The man did not want to listen to him at all and only went forward, going really to certain death. Lucy, when she heard him out, wondered why the palace had sent them on such an unwise mission, and with so few warriors. Hopelessly, she had heard of Aiden being the linchpin of the kingdom, and assumed he should be valued rather than risking his life like this. The man looked at her and replied that there were many people in the palace who wanted him dead, so it was quite an obvious fact. Lucy, when she heard that, she immediately realized that it was probably because he was the king's illegitimate son. But when she said that, she realized that it was better not to, so she asked for forgiveness. But he replied that everyone knew the story. His mother was a courtesan, so the king was ashamed, and Stefano's family, which at that time was on the verge of collapse, sheltered him. As a result, even from a young age, they started sending him to the front lines to fight and told him not to even come back without good results. And when the guy did well, even though he hurt himself badly, people were overjoyed, and Stefano's family has since told him to keep it up. Lucy wondered in surprise, did he really take on the most dangerous missions on behalf of the family? But Aiden said it wasn't really like that. It was for his survival. He doesn't want to make excuses. He really did kill his enemies for himself first and foremost. When Lucy heard the whole story, she looked at him with a pitying look and realized that this man was absolutely not a demon as everyone called him. She took his wounded hand and told him that he had said that they wanted him dead and that the people in the royal palace were his enemies. Aiden replied that that was correct, and the king's concubine he loved so much, Sophie, came first. In fact, Queen Sophie was the daughter of the kingdom's greatest merchant, and thanks to her vast wealth, she has stifled the nobility, and no one can now go against her. The man said that even though he was disqualified from inheriting the throne, he still has royal blood in him, so he thinks he's really the cause of Sophie's concern. Lucy was silent for a while, then asked in surprise, did the king, his own father, not want to protect him? And Aiden explained that the man hated his own son in him. Even if he was sent on a deadly mission, he would have absolutely no interest in making sure he came back alive afterward. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised and did not understand how such a thing could even be. This story struck her very hard, so she even started to cry. When Aiden saw the tears in her eyes, he wondered why she was suddenly crying, but the girl replied that she wasn't crying at all. He sighed heavily, saying he didn't understand her at all. But she put her hand on his cheek and said that even so, she was determined that they would fight together. So, smiling, Lucy asked that he let her go through all the pain and suffering with him, for she and he were now a real couple and should support each other. When Aiden heard this, he was very surprised and couldn't even say a single word to her in the end. In fact, this man was now her husband, and she wasn't sure if she could be a light for him, but at least she wanted to try. At that moment, someone suddenly came into his room and said that he was very interested in watching the upright and unwavering Aiden having a nice time with his girlfriend. When they turned toward the door, they saw a green-haired man in front of them who smiled and said he was glad to see Claudia. And the girl, when she heard that he knew her real name, was very frightened. She couldn't understand how this man could know her. She looked him over and noticed that he was quite elegant and refined, but she still didn't know who he was. Aiden sighed heavily and turned to the guy and told him that he had told him more than once not to come to his house without permission. The man's name was Cyphus, and the boy, smiling, said that the wind had whispered to him that he was badly hurt, and that was why he had rushed to this place headlong. He also said that he thought he should give the bouquet to his cute new girlfriend, because otherwise it would be very rude of him. And at the same second, Cyphus held out a bouquet of yellow irises to Lucy, who stood before him. The girl immediately took the flowers in her hands, said they were incredibly beautiful, and thanked him. She was about to ask why he had given her this particular flower, but the man explained that yellow irises meant sword in the language of flowers, so they must be perfect for her. Soon after, they set up a small table next to Aiden's bed and sat down at it to drink tea and explain the whole situation. Cyphus spoke with a smile and asked if they would allow him to introduce himself again. He said his name and kissed the girl's hand in greeting. The man explained that he was Aiden's best friend, and when Lucy heard that, she was very surprised, for she didn't think that this demon could have any friends at all. Her husband, for his part, explained that they had been in the same class at night school, and the relationship could definitely not be called friendly. Cyphus laughed and said that the kid was just awful, and he himself also wanted to become a knight along with Aiden. However, if there was a single scar on that beautiful face, it would be a loss to the entire nation, in his opinion, so he tearfully gave up his career as a knight. Then Aiden spoke again and called him Marquis Angelus, and also the prodigal son. But the boy, smiling, asked to be called the mysterious wanderer who loved freedom. Lucy was eating a brownie and immediately thought about the fact that if we talk about the Angelus family, it should be noted that it belongs to a conservative group. She had no idea their son was such a unique person, however, and turning to Aiden, she said that now at least she knew he had friends at all. The man, hearing this, became very indignant and asked who she thought he was. How could she think he couldn't have friends? Cyphus, hearing their quarrel, immediately laughed and said that they were a lot of fun to be with. He couldn't even think that there was a girl in the country who could get Aiden to talk, so he looked at her and said that she was unique. Lucy, looking at him in surprise, immediately inquired how he knew her real name. Aiden replied that he'd told Cypher about her situation. He was weird, but he could certainly be trusted. He also added that as proof, Cypher said that she had been sold to that brothel. The boy winked at the girl and said that he wasn't as much of a prodigal son as Aiden had said. He also said that he had some interests in the royal palace, so he was definitely on their side. Lucy, upon hearing this, immediately smiled and said that if Aiden trusted him, then of course she would too. The man smiled again and, pouring them another cup of tea each, thanked her for her trust. And afterward he said that Aiden was a pretty eloquent guy, so he probably hadn't explained all the details and particulars to her. So that's what the man was going to do. He said that the state of the current royal palace was truly appalling. The king's love is not at all interested in politics, and he only follows the orders of his beloved Sophie. The physically weak queen and the king's other concubines are scared to death of her. And despite the fact that in such a situation many rumors appear, Sophie with all her might tries to get rid of the remaining princes. Aiden then stepped into the conversation and said that it really all adds up. Too many had died for unknown reasons lately. Cyphus nodded in agreement and said that it wasn't hard to deal with the little ones. After all, they were practically incapacitated. And it was also worth noting that only the princes were among the dead children. Seeing the surprised look on Lucy's face, he wondered if she had any idea what the matter was. The girl immediately thought about the fact that only princes have the right to inherit the throne. Besides, Sophie's evil hands are stretched not only on the official princes. After pondering for a while, the girl said that she was certainly attacking Aiden as well. The man said with a smile that Aiden and some influential aristocrats had tried to oppose her, such as the late Count Carrot. When Lucy heard that her father was also involved, she was excited and very surprised. Cyphus said that Count Carrot insisted on restoring Aiden to the title of prince, so he thinks he was in a big eyesore for Sophia. The girl couldn't believe that Ira and her stepmother could have teamed up with Sophie to kill her own father, and in this case, everyone would have a benefit. Aiden said that although there was no circumstantial evidence yet, but it was safe to say that Sophia and Ira's interests coincided. And after Count Carrot's death, the next problem could be his rightful heiress, namely Claudia. And that's why they killed Count Carrot. They planned for her to die in the brothel too, so they didn't even bother faking her own death. His friend agreed and said that with their support, Sophie had taken control of the entire Carrot family. He believes that was their plan. In fact, if Aiden hadn't helped Claudia, she would still be suffering in that scary place. Then the man spoke up, saying that he was surprised to find out she was still alive, and suggested that they had harbored such a great dislike for her, choosing the most brutal way to kill her, but hadn't even bothered to check things out properly. The girl thought about the fact that all of this was incredibly difficult. However, she needed to gain strength and confront her sister, because that was her main goal. So after a brief silence, she turned to them and said that she needed to confirm the connection with Sophia and Ira. At this point, Aiden's friend suddenly stood up and said that perhaps this very day would be a very good opportunity to do so, for he had come to tell them about something interesting. The boy and girl immediately began to look at him with surprised looks, for they had no idea what he was talking about. And Cyphus, you pulled the envelopes from your pocket, said that a date had been set for this year's Founders' Feast. He said it would be as soon as 3 months from now, and was incredibly joyful when he said those words. Actually, Founders' Day, as you could understand from the name, this day celebrates the founding of the kingdom. Aristocrats who are 17 years old, before the king, it is the time for debuts in secular society, in order to show everyone the face of the new aristocrats and their successes. Ira, as Aiden had said, would most likely take part as the heir to the Carrot family. When Claudia heard this, she immediately thought of her new name, Lucy. She would soon be able to meet her sister, who had been close to her for all these years, but who had betrayed her. She immediately wondered what Ira would look like if she saw Lucy right now. She thought the girl would probably be incredibly surprised, and she didn't understand how that was possible. In the end, when the girl finally sees her sister again at the founders' party, she can finally learn the truth. And as soon as she thought about it, her hands immediately began to tremble. Aiden, when he noticed it, turned to her and wondered if she was so scared. The girl immediately put a fake smile on her face and looked up at him and said she wasn't at all, and she was fine. And things did get better. Lucy knew very well that now she was not alone and could rely on other people, so she had nothing to be afraid of. Soon afterward, when Aiden was feeling better, they went outside to practice swordsmanship. The man began to train Lucy, while their friend sat in the shade and watched. The girl went immediately on the offensive against the man, and soon, when they stopped, he said she was too fast to act intelligently. He explained that her center of gravity is very unstable, and it affects her swordsmanship, so it makes it much harder for her to land her blows. The girl at this point, however, did her best to hold his sword so that he could not win, and when she went to duel again, she was unable to strike a single blow. The man knocked the sword out of her hands very quickly, and afterward asked if she wanted to stop for a bit to catch her breath at least. Lucy, wiping her sweat, replied that she didn't want to stop, and it was best to keep it going. Cyphus, who continued to watch all of this, realized that he was shocked at how the girl could calmly fight against the devil himself and yet want more fights despite the fact that she was losing all the time. But he continued to drink his tea and, watching everything that was going on, thought of the fact that she was quite a cheerful girl. And as a result, from the moment they found out about the celebration, the girl actively began her preparations for her debut as Aiden's wife. She had many different lessons, and of course they took place in the presence of her husband and his friend. Cyphus once said that her training in manners should be brief. To all he explained that she should have the basics of what she'd been going through when she was still Claudia fixed in her head already. And Aiden, upon reflection, agreed with him, and said that actually he doubted there was any problem if there had been a real debut. However, Lucy's debut is a little different than normal. It will be their opportunity to make sure Ira and her allies know she's still alive. The girl, hearing this, agreed with him and said that it wouldn't be long before her sister found out, and she was sure she would have a target on her back. Aiden looked her straight in the eye then, and told her that as long as he was around, she didn't need to worry. He would make sure she was as safe as possible for as long as possible. However, he would not be able to be with her every minute of his time. At that moment, his friend intervened and said in a hurt voice that to their knowledge he would be there too. But he also added that he couldn't do anything to risk damage to his face. Many women would be very upset if something happened to him. Lucy was serious and said that she was capable of defending herself on her own, and that's why she was training so hard with Aiden. Soon after another training session, the man said that was the end of it. She had done quite well and had improved a lot since they had first started. Lucy looked at him and thanked him, but she thought of the man as a madman. Her whole body ached and she could barely stand. She leaned on her sword and tried to get to her feet after she fell due to the heavy blows. She almost fell, however, and thanks to Aiden being nearby, he was able to pick her up. It made her very uncomfortable, but she looked the man straight in the eye and thanked him for it. Aiden, however, was uncomfortable with what had happened. She felt his hands on her body and realized that they were very muscular, but at the same time blistered, and assumed it was all because of his constant training. She can only imagine how much work it took for him to reach the power of the devil himself. Even from his childhood, he had to train very hard without breaks or any rests, and this impressed the girl very much. Soon he moved away from her and said they were going somewhere for a while afterward. When Lucy heard this, she was very surprised and wondered if it was really true. She hadn't really been anywhere for a long time, so she was very interested. Soon, when she had cleaned herself up, they went to a very nice and expensive clothing store. The girl went through a lot of outfits and wondered if she still wasn't ready. The saleswoman who was helping her pick out her outfit turned to the man and said that it would take some time for the lady to get dressed, as outfits are indeed very hard to put on sometimes. After a while, Lucy finally came out in a dazzlingly beautiful white dress and apologized for the wait. She immediately started fixing her hair and, apologizing, said that she had never worn something like this before, so she wasn't very comfortable and felt weird. Aiden and the saleswoman were very surprised when they saw her dressed like that. The man couldn't even say a word for a while. But soon he finally got his act together and said it was a pretty good choice, and added that in that case they would take it. Suddenly, Lucy turned to him and asked him to wait a moment. The man immediately became wary and asked if she didn't like it. But the girl replied that the dress was really excellent, but she thought they should not take such an expensive dress. But the man asked that she not worry so much about money, and besides, she will be coming to the festival as his wife, and such a choice of dress is a major part of the event. Then he said that since she wasn't too happy with the dress, she could pick out shoes and jewelry for it for now. At that moment, a saleswoman came up to them and showed them one very beautiful necklace. He immediately paid attention to it. The man took it from the pad and held it up to Lucy, showing her how beautiful she looked in it. He said, smiling, that they probably needed to do something about her hair color and suggested that maybe they could pick up some kind of wig of a different color. The girl had never actually debuted as Claudia, so no one would be able to know what she looked like. However, she could imagine that rumors about her unusual silver hair could spread quickly. After being silent for a while, she said that Claudia was very fond of her silver hair, so she would keep it until she got the revenge she longed for. Aiden looked away from her then and said that actually that hair color looked very pretty on her, so he didn't think it might be a problem. But he also said that she will look very even, whether they change her hair color or not. And so from that moment a few months passed, and finally came the very day of the festival. The girl still agreed to this expensive dress, chose some jewelry and new shoes, and eventually they were able to pick up a pretty good wig for her head, since she really wasn't going to recolor her hair. Now they had an incredibly interesting ash color, and as a result, Lucy by the day of the festival presented the perfect image of a girl who is more ready than ever for her debut. In fact, she was fully prepared to enter the battlefield and face the rest of the women. However, the thought of her sister still scared the girl for a while longer, and she was afraid she might do something wrong. Once he and Aiden arrived at the manor, they just stood at the entrance for a while, staring at it. Then the man said they should go in. The girl agreed with his decision. The time has finally come to send her sister to the battlefield so she can exact her long-awaited revenge. At this time, there were already a great number of different people, both adults and juniors, gathered in the throne room. And as soon as Lucy entered the hall with her husband, people immediately began to whisper, for Aiden was the very devil. And as soon as they saw that he had not come alone, they immediately noticed the girl, whom they had never seen before. The ladies talked about how he could dress as much as he wanted, but it didn't hide the smell of death that was all around him. And when Lucy heard all this, she was very indignant, for she did not understand how they could talk about Aiden like that. At this point, the man turned to her and suggested that she should just let them discuss it all and not worry about it, and not forget why they had come to this place. The man had gotten used to such rumors during all this time, so it didn't bother him anymore. Lucy, hearing this, agreed, for they had come to confirm the relationship between Ayla and the royal community. She turned to the man and said that he was indeed right and apologized, saying that she had let her anger get to her head. However, when she looked at him, she couldn't believe that ladies could discuss such a handsome man. After all, he was really dressed stunningly. After a moment's silence, Lucy said that he looked different in a military uniform. Aiden agreed and said that unfortunately he couldn't actually show up to the ball in bloody armor, so he had to find an alternative. Since Lucy is assumed to be a distant relative of Stefan's family, Aiden is with her as her escort. Soon after, Cyphus finally did approach them and smiled and said hello to his friends, saying that the two of them didn't look like a couple in love at all. After that, he extended his hand to the girl and said that she looked just perfect. Lucy immediately smiled and said that she didn't know that he would also be present at the event. When Cyphus heard this, he was very surprised and said that of course, after all, he must look after his little cousin. He then pointed toward a girl with blue hair who was standing near the boys and giggling softly. He explained that her beauty, like the rest of the family, was marvelous, and that was why there were already many gentlemen crowded around her. Lucy stared at his cousin for a while and then looked for her sister, for she realized that she too must surely be out there somewhere by now. Cyphus, noticing her gaze searching for her, immediately said that this was a very important day for them, so they needed to discuss their plan again before executing it. He also said that they were the more important players on this battlefield, so after a while, they talked through the details of the plan. And soon Lucy approached the royal family who sat on the throne and said her name. She bowed to them, The girl had a small bouquet in her hands and said it was an honor to stand before His Majesty. The King of the Kingdom of London, his name was Victor, waved his hand, showing all his displeasure and boredom. When the girl saw him, she immediately thought of the fact that this man was the king, but he was also Aiden's father. They were completely different from each other. And besides, this person who was standing next to them was Prince Michael. It was just Aiden's half-brother, who was just a horrible person. Cyphus, before the girl went to greet the royal family, said that he had been lovingly raised by his mother and had a significant social standing because of it in society. He was actually being a bit of an idiot, so the guy didn't think she needed to be alert when she was around. Lucy continued to bow and thought about the fact that the person she should be paying as much attention to as possible was precisely his mother, the royal concubine, Lady Sophia. Aiden's friend said there was a pretty huge possibility that she was supporting Ira and her stepmother in all sorts of evil deeds. The girl thought of the woman standing in front of her now, who might be complicit in her father's death. When Lucy finally did finish doing the formalities, she began to approach Aiden again, who was standing off to the side. Seeing the look on her face, he immediately inquired about what had happened, and also asked if she was really that worried. The girl did have a little trouble breathing. She said she was all right, and also asked where the king's wife was. Aiden then explained that this girl was prone to illness and usually didn't show up at such formal events because her immune system was very weak indeed. He also said that she is actually in poor physical condition, but he is sure that Lady Sophia is exercising all the influence to keep her from showing herself. Lucy, hearing this, said that she understood. Then Aiden turned to the side and turned his attention to Viscount McGregor. Cyphus stepped closer to them and said that Viscount McGregor was one of Lady Sophia's most loyal servants. Lady Sophia actually has many fans, however it is assumed that it is the man who does all the dirty work. Aiden turned to the girl and said that he was said to be well connected in the outside world and possibly had ties to the brothel the girl had been sent to. When Lucy heard that, she was very surprised and said that if they found it, they could also get proof that Ira had just kicked her out of the Carrot family. The man agreed with her. Then she started to leave, saying she would deal with it. She was going to go straight to him to sort it out. However, Aiden stepped closer to her and took her by the shoulders and told her not to hurry so much, for she had just finished her introduction to the king, and he wondered why she shouldn't have something to drink first. In the end, Lucy didn't argue. She felt a little bad about making the man care so much about her. And at that moment, her half-sister suddenly passed by her, not paying any attention to her at all. But Lucy felt very strange at this meeting. Without a doubt, she should have been expecting her. However, she felt a little uneasy, but the girl gathered her thoughts quickly and ran after her with the Count. They went out on the veranda, and the man said that she must be the daughter of Carrot, of whom he had heard so much. He added that he had known it would be her, for she was the most beautiful lady at the ball. Ira immediately laughed and asked what he wanted after all. The man replied that he had heard about the Carrot family and that there were 2 daughters, but one had passed away from illness.